Why can I now one-shot goblins with Wind Strike? Why should I be using water spells on lava dragons? And what is going on in old school RuneScape? Well, combat is evolving. Or being rebalanced. Sorry, the PTSD. There are genuinely massive changes coming to this game, and I'm surprised that it hasn't been talked about more. Everyone is sleeping on Project Rebalance, NPC defense changes. Now, this is a pretty hefty chunk of a blog. So let me run you through the key parts of it while playing the game. I'm currently on a beta server right now, so we can test these changes live in the flesh. These servers are available to everybody. They're actually really useful, but you get there by converting your save to beta worlds on a normal world, and then you can log into them. I struggled to find that out, but once you're in here, you've got loads of cool features that you can use to cut about the game, set your stats, get max gear, all the rest of it. So why are Jagex doing this rebalance? Well, long story short, it's because they want to increase the diversity of weapons and styles that people use. In turn, that widens the reward space for future updates. It enables them to bring out more niche weapons, all that sort of thing, and just manage power creep a bit better. It's kind of like when they nerfed the blowpipe from being this all-encompassing Giga OP item and took some of the range strength that allowed them to put that on Missouri instead, and at the same time bring out Crystal and Beaufort for variety in different gear that helps progression up to the T-bow. I think it's a reasonable approach to take personally. I do have a few criticisms of this current rebalance, but on the whole, I think it's positive for the game. It's all about the execution. I think the biggest changes proposed are the ones to the elemental spellbook. It's the reason why I can wind strike a goblin and hit a 5. In the main game, this is only 2 damage max. Now, something like this is a very fundamental change to what makes RuneScape RuneScape. All the nostalgia wrapped up in these spells is changing somewhat. And the reason for this is Jagex wants to bring in elemental weaknesses for different monsters. For example, here, an adamant dragon is weak to earth spells. But in order for elemental weaknesses to be significant, they have to change up how the standard spellbook works generally. So for example, with the strike spells, you only ever use Fire Strike because the max hit is 8. Why the hell would you ever use Wind Strike because the max hit is 2? But in this new system, every single strike spell has the same max hit of 8. So it's 8 for wind, 8 for water, 8 for earth, and it's also going to be 8 for fire. The idea is that once you've unlocked all these spells, you can use any of them and they'll hit the same, but when you go and find a monster which is weak to a certain style, you're very much encouraged to use that style. So for example, lava dragons will be rebalanced to have a 50% weakness to water spells, meaning I can actually gain max hits and accuracy on them. Water Strike's new max hit of an 8 goes to a max hit of a 12 because of this 50% water weakness. In fact, when you monster examine a lava dragon, you can see that for yourself, 50% water weakness. So in this instance, all of the other strike spells will have a max hit of 8, but the Water Surge has a max hit of 12 and 50% more accuracy because of this change. So you are encouraged to think about which spell you're bringing to an NPC. Initially, my reaction was, what the hell happens in the very early game? Can you just instantly hit 8s off Tutorial Island? But the answer is no. If I set my magic level to 1, my max hit now is going to be a 2. However, when I unlock Water Strike at 5 magic, my max hit for both spells will move up to 4. Yep, it does work. The same goes for Earth Strike. When I unlock that, I move up to 6, which is the normal max hit of Earth Strike, and all the spells hit the same. So I'm glad they've thought of that, because that was definitely a concern I had. It does seem to make sense. I like it. It's also worth noting that because elemental weaknesses are additive to your current gear, this is more effective in the medium and early game. And I think it also makes sense that the tomes drop down in their magic damage percentage because of this elemental weaknesses. So they're going to go down to like 10% in their respective styles, which is still good. And I do want to add in, it's the same for wave spells as it is for strike spells. If they're on the same tier, they have the same max hit, which I do quite like. Where this starts to lose me a little bit is in the theming of each monster and what they're weak to. So this is a full change list, which I think is interesting. A full look at which NPCs are changing. It's actually not that many NPCs are going to have an elemental weakness, which I thought was surprising, but maybe there's a reason for that. In fact, once you take out duplicates, there's only actually 32 NPCs in the entire game which are going to have an elemental weakness, which seems rather low to me. Then I think part of the problem I have with this rebalance is it doesn't seem to make that much sense when you actually look at what monster is weak to what style. So for example, An adamant dragon is weak to earth. I don't know why, because most other dragons are weak to water. But then it's like, oh, a bronze dragon is weak to earth as well. So maybe it's a metal dragon thing. Oh yeah, look. Iron dragons are also weak to earth. Maybe it's metal dragons. Oh wait, why is a rune dragon weak to water? Steel dragon's weak to water as well. What is the difference between those metal dragons? I don't know. A red dragon is weak to earth when all the other dragons are weak to water. It just doesn't really seem to make that much sense. I had in my head that this would build the game out in a bit more of an intuitive way than just making up random weaknesses. Or maybe I'm being unfair. I mean, can you look at this guy and tell me what defensive style he's weak to for melee? So maybe it doesn't really matter. Well, for Mage, he's now weak to water. Moles can literally swim. Like I said, maybe it doesn't matter that the mole is particularly weak to water now, and it's kind of difficult to tell. I haven't really played like Pokemon, and I haven't watched much anime, so who knows. And I actually think this all gets a bit less intuitive when you actually start looking at the numbers for elemental weakness severity. They're basically just all the same for some reason. There are some slightly higher ones as 100, but for the most part, they're all 50. So the giant mole has an elemental weakness of water at a severity of 50, which is the exact same as a fire giant that's literally smoking and full of fire being elementally weak to water at 50 as well. They're the same. Surely you'd expect the fire giant to be more, and there to be some sort of differential between all of these numbers rather than just being 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. A moss giant is weak to fire at a rate of 50, the exact same that an ice warrior, which is literally made out of ice, is weak to fire. It just doesn't add up. And a mountain troll is weak to fire as well, for some reason. I wouldn't mind this if this was like 20. I think that makes more sense. And say you really ramp up these ice things to be even worse off against fire spells. I think that maybe these have all just been left at 50 because maybe that doesn't rock the boat in terms of where things sit in the current meta. But to be honest, I think if we're going to do this, why not lean into a fire giant getting completely obliterated by water spells? I think that's probably what most people want to see, and in the numbers, I just don't really see it. It's all a bit weird right now. There are also no NPCs that have a weakness to air either, for no real good reason, to be honest. I think that should also be included. And this is getting a bit nitpicky here, but I feel like there are just so many thematic NPCs just missing from this list. I mean, all these guys look pretty fiery. I think they should be weak to water, but they're just not right now. It does say full list, full change list. I'm not getting that wrong. So I think there are plenty more NPCs that could have an elemental weakness that aren't on this thing right now. They do go through to give some DPS examples of existing NPCs. For example, an adamant dragon is a bit of a weird one because people don't really kill addy dragons a whole lot. And when you go down to the mid-game setup, they're using Earth Blast. You wouldn't be using Earth Blast because you've done Dragon Slayer 2, which means you have 75 mage, which means you'd be using Earth Wave. So I don't know. I think maybe more thought is required on the actual specifics of all these numbers and weaknesses, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, I do like the idea, but I'm just saying maybe slow down a bit more and focus on the details. I don't know if this is just a boomer in me, but everything just seems to be moving so fast-paced in this game right now. It's great. Kind of. Don't get me wrong. But it is scary. Another thing I wasn't a particular fan of is that everything is unchanged in PvP. The Tome of Fire will still work as it does now. I think there's a time and a place for PvP, PvM separation, like the Shadow. I don't think you should be able to shadow people, but the inconsistencies surely should remain to a minimum. The Echo Boots weren't allowed in PvP for honestly no reason. And I feel like there hasn't really been an effort here to try and at least emulate what the standard spellbook now is for PvP in this proposal, which is a shame. I think it's a bit of a safe cop-out, but for the long term, it will damage PvP absolutely and make it more confusing. The second huge update coming to old school RuneScape is a change to range defense. This is easiest understood when you consider how melee works. You have 3 different styles: stab, slash, and crush, but for range, you just have range. This is what we want to change. There will now be 3 different range attack styles: heavy, standard, and light. Heavy will be bolts and javelins, so crossbows and ballistas. Standard will be arrows, so that's T-bow, bowfer, crystal bow, magic short bow. And light will be darts, knives, blowpipe, thrown axes, all that sort of stuff. Now, despite max hits being broken in the beta worlds, in brackets slow down, this won't actually change any max hits in the main game. It's all about changing your accuracy based on what type of ranged weapon you're using. And again, in theory, I'm a fan. T-bow and blowpipe dominate basically everywhere, with bowfer just bringing up the rear close behind. Now, this is a big update, splitting out range defense into 3 components, but actually, what's changing? Really not a lot. 30 NPCs in the entire game. Yeah, it's strange that they're only going for 30. Maybe it's just a low risk start and then this gets rolled out further and further across more NPCs. Or it's just to give them a diverse reward spectrum for future NPCs. And it's all going to get a bit weird in the future. I don't know, but it's basically affecting nothing. And when you look at the numbers, range defense is staying the same for basically every single NPC in the game for standard and light defenses. That's arrows and bows and blowpipes and darts and all that sort of stuff. It generally seems that the only ones that are actually changing when you dig into the numbers are the heavy defenses, which are going down. So crossbows are getting better. That's essentially it. Crossbows are getting better on 30 NPCs. It really doesn't seem that big right now. And I do quite like that they're splitting out the defenses, but this really feels like a phase 1. In comparison to melee defenses, you've always got different stab, crush, slash defenses all over the place, and there's a diversity all over the game. With only 30 NPCs here, maybe I'm just being delusional, but it just seems like not a lot right now. And speaking of melee defenses, they are also being adjusted for some NPCs. I've looked into the numbers and there are slight changes that lean into the current weaknesses of things. For example, dragons are becoming more weak to stab than they are now. And for example, a gargoyle is now a bit more weak to crush than it was before. However, from what I've seen, none of them are getting more tanky. Overall, I think these changes are good for the game. A little bit more polish may be needed on elemental weaknesses, but it's all nearly there and it doesn't change too much really. It just gives us an exciting future. One thing to note is we're on the 2nd channel right now, so make sure you are subscribing. And as always, you can use code SOLO to get 10% off at Creator Crafted. They provide amazing, officially Jagex licensed merch. Every purchase supports me. I'm buying a house this summer, so get me an extra bedroom. You know what I mean. I'm just kidding, but I'm not really. Go and buy something. There is a great spectrum of all different products, and I guarantee you'll find something you like over there. Code SOLO, 10% off.